very warm welcome to everyone. Thank you for fighting your afternoon and after lunch laziness and telling that today is not going to be the day that you give in to that urge to go and take a nap. We have a fantastic panel with us today. So I was preparing the whole morning my opening remarks, but I realized I was very much humbled over the lunch. I don't really need to say much because they will say everything that, and even more. But before I pass the floor to these amazing women, I wanted to tell you a story of two other women. How many of you know Mary Ward and Bridget Driscoll? Anyone? So Mary Ward was an Anglo-Irish writer and a scientist who, as many women at that time, was educated at home together with her sister. She was not allowed to go to university. However, she was very keen to learn. She came from a scientific family, so she kept in touch with many scientists per mail. She was very famous for discovering a few things with her self-made microscope, but when she decided to publish them, she was so convinced that she would not be accepted into the publishing society because of her gender and because of her lack of formal academic degrees, that she did it herself. She printed 250 copies, distributed it, and within 20 years it was a bestseller on the subject. It was reprinted 8 times by the time she was dead, which happened on the 31st of August, 1869, when she and her husband were traveling on self-made steam engine, self-moving car at that time, built by her cousins, when she was thrown off the car and died instantly. So she, Mary, is therefore the first known example of the auto catastrophe or auto death in the world. 27 years later, Bridget Driscoll happened to have the first pedestrian that was killed by a car when she was crossing a street. The car was traveling above speed limit, which was back then 14 miles per hour. So why am I saying that? Because it appears that the first wave of industrial revolution was not very kind to women. The first known fatalities were women. So what do we have actually to do that the next wave, the current wave, we call it the fourth industrial revolution at the World Economic Forum, many others call it different ways. You know, it's a society smart society 5.0 in Japan and so on. But the point is, how do we make sure that these technological revolutions are actually much more inclusive, gender balanced, and empowering? And with that, I would like to pass on to the panel. We have a fantastic panel. They will introduce themselves. They will tell where they come from, their names, and what they will be speaking on. And just let's go on this fascinating journey together. Ritika?
Hello. I'm thrilled to be part of this panel, as I've already shared with my panel members, with women who are actually actively working at the intersection of gender and technology. I am from the Observer Research Foundation, and I'm hoping today to share insights and thoughts from the perspective of an emerging economy, from a developing country, from a country that is aggressively pushing the cause of digital and the leveraging of technology to fill in gaps in its still unfinished development agenda, and a country with a very visible digital divide that prevents women from not only accessing technology, but also from using technology in a more meaningful way. I'm going to focus my remarks on two interrelated key issues that a country like India needs to address when it comes to questions of gender and technology. One is the lack of disaggregated gender data, and the second is the lagging participation of women in technology, not just as workers in the field and related fields, but also as adopters and users of technology. So addressing the first issue, the lack of disaggregated gender data. Women aren't being counted enough in conversations that concern them. Gender differences are often glossed over because of averages or simply because the information doesn't exist in the first place. Data can provide the hard proof to then be put to use for more effective policies and social programs, and even as data equity increases, to propagate more effective and more gender-neutral platforms, applications, and technologies. The question is, can we actually leverage data and technology to fill in gender data gaps? The answer is yes. Digital data and machine learning can help increase the policy-making knowledge bandwidth. There's interest in developing big data and data analytics for the processes of development broadly, and specifically to fill in the gender data gap. A report released earlier this year by Data2X presented how sources of digital data, cell phone activity, internet activity, remote sensor information, satellite information can be used to do just this. I'm going to provide one example of a project they carried out. In Bangladesh, Kenya, Haiti, Nigeria, Tanzania, satellite imagery was correlated with demographic and health survey data to find links between geospatial variables like aridity, accessibility, elevation, and health phenomena like stunting. This resulted in highly detailed maps that clearly indicate gender inequality when it comes to health phenomena like stunting. Another example, actually, that I'd like to also cite is they did a project in a Latin American metropolitan city where they're sifted through credit card and cell phone data to discover patterns on women's mobility and spending, to understand their economic lifestyle, their priorities and needs. Such information could potentially be used to gauge vulnerabilities that women face when it comes to economic shocks and upheavals. In India, digital data has already begun to be used in a number of ways, in a number of sectors. Scope absolutely exists to derive much needed gender-specific data in various fields ranging from well-being to access to schools, clinics, from mental health to hunger and malnutrition, areas we know where men and women are differently affected. Two specific examples that I'd like to cite here. When it comes to transportation, for instance, can we use sources of big data to collect disaggregated data on travel patterns of women, timings, routes, distances, the types of public transportations used to highlight and address issues that concern women mobility in our cities and in rural areas, so that we arrive at solutions that move beyond segregation-based solutions and surveillance-based solutions. Another sector that I'd like to highlight is health. So women's health research in India is nascent. There are gaps, for example, that exist when it comes to single, unmarried, or elderly women in India. And a specific example is that data is emerging that non-communicable diseases like respiratory diseases or heart conditions are actually emerging as key reasons for deaths of women in India, and yet public health agendas when it comes to women are still largely focused on sexual and reproductive health. There are, of course, challenges and concerns of using big data sources and deriving disaggregated data, and I'm sure maybe we can go into that in the discussion. Two corollaries. The point to note is that especially when we're talking about using sources like online activity or credit card usage or mobile use, that it means that women need to be part of these data pools, which means that women actually need to be using these technologies. Secondly, greater availability of disaggregated gender data isn't the end-all and be-all. Its use will be circumscribed by biases and motivations of those who are actually using this data and putting it to use. This means that stakeholder voices, like those of women, need to be part of the digital storytelling that is identifying needs, trends, and opportunities and putting them to use. This leads me to the second issue that is pertinent particularly for a country like India, which is the lack of sufficient representation of women in technology, not just as workers in the field and as leaders in big tech and related fields, but also as adopters of technology and as users of technology. Here, I'd like to highlight 5 interesting findings that are pertinent, that in the Indian context, which I think are worth highlighting. So one, right now, there's actually a higher percentage of women in the working age group as compared to men, and yet women lag significantly far behind men when it comes to using mobile phones or internet. And these gaps are higher in India than compared to other emerging economies like Vietnam, Thailand, and China. Secondly, rural women are more affected than urban women because of lower literacy rates, because of lower access to English education, because of time poverty issues. We have to be aware about biases in data pools related to women that prioritize women that have access to technology, that can afford technology, and more educated women. And also understanding the problems that rural women face can help and close the circle when it comes to actually targeting digital empowerment of rural women specifically. Third thing, when it comes to using technology like social media, an interesting fact that I found is that there, particularly rural women, but also in the urban context, there is a sense of fear and insecurity about using social platforms because, for instance, there's a stigma against women using public spaces that are male-dominated, like internet cafes. Women and girls are scared that that boys in their classes will find out that they have online profiles, and they will use them to harass them. There is fear and fears of hacking, fears of their data being used wrongfully, for example, their photos. Number 4, when it comes to the participation of women in technology field in India, the issue is less about the actual number of people, of women that are present in such industries. The greater issue is actually the fact that more women leave quicker and they leave sooner in tech industries. This is because of a wage gap that materializes after entry-level jobs. This is because of home life concerns that begin to pressurize women. And it's because of women eventually end up playing more staffing and support roles rather than playing leadership roles in programs in technology companies. And lastly, the 5th point that I'd like to make is that India will necessarily have to begin with skilling its population with the basic digital skills first and foremost. But as they do so, policymakers in India need to be aware of the fact that basic digital skilling will provide women access to lower skilled and more routine jobs that are in greater threat of being digitized and automated, so that in the future there is actually a potential of less women being part of a more digitized and automated labor market and being represented in working populations. And secondly, basic digital skilling can end up also reinforcing traditional gender segregation that exists in real life, even as digital allows women non-traditional employment opportunities, for example, away from the traditional workplaces, for example, remote location work. It doesn't say much for gender disparities if women still continue working behind closed doors at home.
Ritika, let me come in here for just a second. This is fantastic presentation. I'm just wondering, what would yours tell these policymakers that may be in the room, where you say, okay, well, digital skills is all very important, but guess what? Women then will end up taking the jobs that will be automated first. So what's the answer? Not to do that?
I'm sorry, I didn't understand the question.
So what would you recommend to the policymakers? You highlighted a very interesting problem in my point of view, where you say that as policymakers are trying to get more people, trying to bring more women into this space by providing the skills, yet the jobs that they will take as a result of being upskilled will be automated first.
This is just another one of the contradictory situations that India finds itself in. And you can't say that, like I said, it has to start from basic skilling, because so many men and so many women particularly don't even have the basic tools to recognize how to use social media properly, or safety guidelines on these online platforms, or how to use mobile phones properly, how to use apps on mobile phones. But the idea would be that once that these programs need to be supplemented with additional digital skilling programs that allows women to, for instance, begin to code, to understand how to do that. So these basic digital skilling programs need to be supplemented with better digital skilling. And this is something that can only happen piecemeal and together. At what pace? I think pace is a factor that Indian policymakers can control to a larger degree than actually answering that specific question.
Should there be also kind of a social component to that, where they will say, look, you're learning these skills, but there is a risk. It's not a panacea, it's not a silver bullet. You have to be fully aware that, use this opportunity to quantum jump rather than just be more efficient at what you do anyway.
Absolutely, and talking about this broader social change, this actually responds to the need, which I'm sure is going to come up in the panel, of just the need to better sensitize women, what gender parity actually means when it comes to technology, and what economic opportunities mean. When we say economic opportunities exist, what do we mean by that in the current context and in the future context?
Fantastic. Now hold that thought. We will come back to the Indian context in a few. This is a fascinating example because all my data is actually US based. But we actually you talked a lot about data, you talked about social sciences, and you talked about a lot of policy. We're very lucky to have Aneka here who worked in this space for many years. Would you mind sharing some perspectives with us, please?
I'm Ineke Buskens. I'm Ineke Buskens. I have been working in the field of ICT and women empowerment since 2004. And one of the big things I've done in my life is lead a research network in Africa and the Middle East that looked into women empowerment issues and the use of information communication technology for empowerment. 35 teams, 18 countries. And I've learned a lot. So what I'm going to share with you, I'm sharing also on behalf of all those teams and all the research participants. So I want to tell you straight away what I would like you to take away from our panel, and definitely from what I want to share with you. And that is that the world will not change through technology. What needs to change in the world and what needs to change in us will not change through technology. I know that the president of the Research Observe Foundation has already stated it this morning, and I want to kind of start off with a little example that will highlight that whenever a new technology is designed or used, when we take our old selves to the program, the situation only will get exacerbated, because technology makes us better at what we do. If we do gender discrimination, technology will do it better. If we do human trafficking, girls and women trafficking, technology will help us to do it better. I don't know if you know the kind of story documentary that Ray Kurzweil produced about his creation of his ideal woman, which is not only an artificial intelligence, but also a virtual intelligence. And there is a moment in the movie where she actually gets the same rights as a human person. She passes a test of altruistic love, and she is given, by the judge, the rights that a human person should have. Now, this looks like a very noble and advanced kind of state where humanity could evolve to such a stage that we realize that what makes us human is actually altruistic love, right? However, in one of the interviews that accompanied that movie documentary, the interview took place with the person playing the entity's lawyer in the movie, which was, by the way, Alan Dershowitz. He is asked by the interviewer, which is Ray Kurzweil, the maker of the movie, whether he sees good coming out from all this technology, this artificial intelligence. And he says, oh yes, and immediately he gives an example of where from the center of the world, let's say Harvard University, somewhere in the developing world there would be a lack of doctors, and doctors at Harvard University would be able to do the operation from a distance. Now, what's wrong with this picture? What is wrong with this picture? That the mindset that thinks about an advanced future where virtual artificial intelligence is given legal human personhood, there still needs to be a developing world. That's what's wrong with this picture. Neocolonialism isn't good for women. It's definitely not good for women in the developing world, because it's only because of the neocolonial practices of the North that a lot of the developing world countries are still in the state that they are. So women suffer directly from this so-called mindset that can envisage to be so noble to give a virtual artificial intelligence human statehood, but in a way deny so many living human beings in the developing world the same rights to explore who they are to their full potential. Okay, having said that, can technology be good for women? Yes, technology can be good for women. It can allow women to run their household and do a business, so that their husbands and partners still do not have to kind of really take care of the children, of the ailing mother, and so on. So much is written about women and their triple burdens, their triple responsibilities. Caretakers, community caregivers, mothers, housewives, and productive workers. And technology helps women to do that better. So in a way, you could say in that way, technology, while helping women, is also entrenching unequal gender relations even further. That's why I'm saying it's not the technology that will change any of this, it's the intentionality behind the technology. Now I want to come to the third point, because if you zoom in on an area, you get to see things very clearly. Like, for instance, the focus area within the gender and tech field, there's a focus on women in information and communication technology. The women that want to study ICT subjects, that want to work in it, and that are being like tech startups, lecturers at universities in computer science, and so on. If you take a human female perspective in whatever society and you follow this, her human trajectory in her sexist society, you will see at certain moments where she makes decisions that are considered a problem from a gender-balanced society or state perspective, but that make eminent sense from an individual girl perspective. If you grow up and your mathematics teacher tells you he's never seen a girl perform as a boy, of course, you know, you integrate that. You want to be a good girl, so you do perform less. Studies have shown that there doesn't even have to be explicit, overt affirmation of women performing less than boys for women already to oblige and perform less. Then the next phase comes. Imagine she does kind of persist and enters in a computer science department. If she escapes obvious sexual harassment from her co-students and from lecturers, then there is still the fact that she has to go into industry, because in order to kind of finish your studies, at least in Africa, you have to do internships in industry and come back. And there you will meet the sexism in the workplace. If you can still survive that, and you go home, and you want to kind of have a family, then you will discover that if you enter a business, with the technology moving so fast, your professional field evolving so quickly, you getting out to have a child is not a good idea. It may cost you your career. Now, if you ask industry, and fortunately the World Economic Forum has done that, they have asked industry, why do you think is the number of women in the field of information and communication technology decreasing? Why do we see less women there? Industry has come up with 3 key moments. They say it's difficult to recruit women because there are not enough suitable women. Well, whether that is true or not, it's something else. It's what they perceive. The second problematic moment they acknowledged was there is unconscious gender bias at work from some supervisors and from colleagues. And third, what they call the work-life balance. Work-life balance is probably an industry euphemistic term for women's triple burdens. And in that regard, I have to kind of digress a little bit, but it's very pertinent. Work-life balance is, of course, not only a problem for women, but also for men in a society where money is and profits are the core of the economic striving. Now, in our society, in our modern day society, the economy has become the main institution. It wasn't always like this. For instance, in Europe in the Middle Ages, religion was the main institution. But now, unquestioningly, the whole world seems to have accepted that economy is our main institution. We derive our main values from that main institution, like competition. It's better to compete than to collaborate. It's about money. Well, when money is really the key focus, women will always lose, because who is going to pay you for having a child, for rearing a child, for caring for your elderly mother? So this is not only an economic issue or even a cultural issue, it's very definitely a women issue. We have made a predatory kind of economy the main institution of our human societies. When I came to this conference, I thought, what is it that I want to get out of this conference? And I thought, I want actually to get an answer on two questions. One is, do people want to change? Because there's no way how you can change your societies if you don't want to change yourself. And the second question is, do you have a plan? Do you know how to change? Do you know how to change as an individual? And do you know how to change your societies and your communities? Now, the women I've worked with since 2004, they actually had plans to change. And they actually did change themselves and their societies. Like we've had teams that created the first radio talk show about sex in Sudan. And she was not killed. No, she became a national hero. This is just one example. There were many. But in order to come to that kind of accomplishment, that had ripple effects and still has ripple effects beyond their communities to their wider countries, you have to own the sexism that is in you. You have to own what you gain from a sexist, gender unequal society. And unless you have that courage and that honesty towards yourself, you will not be able to contribute to your society in the way that, would save the world.
That is
Thank
fascinating. Absolutely fascinating. As you mentioned, the main driving paradigm of the current society is obviously economy, but at the same time, according to the World Bank, less than half of the women globally, obviously there are very different statistics at the national or regional level, but globally less than half of women are employed, while 3/4 of men are. And over lunch, Danielle was sharing some fantastic examples of female entrepreneurship and how it's significantly different from some male-dominated professions and so on. Would you mind coming in there?
Hello. Can you hear me? Okay, great. So my name is Danielle Kayembe. I'm a serial entrepreneur, and I work on projects at the intersection of women, social impact, and technology. And what I wanted to talk a little bit about today was actually just kind of going back a little bit in terms of human history. So one of the things I like to give as an example is the wheelbase of a car, which is something that most of us probably don't think a lot about. But it actually hasn't changed since about 300 BC, when the Roman gladiators were, fighting each other. So kind of from the time they had those chariots to Victorian England, where people were riding horse and carriages, to the actual kind of wheelbase and tracks on a train, to automobiles. And one of the things that most people don't know is that when we started the race to put man on the moon, the size of the spaceship was actually determined by the size of the train tracks that carried the ships to the launch pad. So when Elon Musk had to decided to build SpaceX and kind of launch all of this new technology, one of the first things that he had to do was redesign his own wheelbase and redesign the transportation that would actually move these spaceships around. The reason that I talk about this is because one of the things that we're unaware of, right? So in terms of our own lives on a daily basis is patriarchy. And so in many ways, the wheelbase, for example, I think of as kind of an invisible organizing force. So the wheelbase actually determines what time you wake up in the morning. There's only a certain number of cars that can fit on a road. So, the size of your park in your neighborhood, and all of these things that you probably don't think about, and very few people would correlate the two things. And I think of patriarchy much the same way, right? It determines what's valued in our society. It determines what things look like, who and what is represented and valued and compensated. And I think that when it comes to technology, we don't make this correlation. We don't realize that things are what I call coded for patriarchy or coded for male as the default. So a lot of the examples that I think about, for example, in cities. So I see there's like kind of a third of the people in the room here are women. How many women have ever struggled to open a door? I see a show of hands. You ever had trouble opening a door, heavy door? Okay. So the reason is that doors are designed for the tensile strength of an average man. Have you ever thought about this? No. I'm sure most women have experienced waiting in long lines for bathrooms, right? I don't even have to ask that. So the difference is that women do 5 things in a restroom. So you might have to change your clothes, you might do your makeup, you might have a small child with you that you're helping to get dressed, you might have an elderly parent, as she mentioned, that you're helping to use the restroom, right? So whereas men just do 1 thing in the restroom typically.
Sometimes it turns into social occasion as well.
I can't even answer that. So another great example are automobiles. When airbags were first released, there was a rash of both deaths and injuries to women and children, and they couldn't figure out why. And what turned out was that the 3 or 4 men who designed the airbags were all over 250 pounds. And since there were no women in the room who were designing or kind of part of the conversation, by the time this was actually out on the road and being tested, it resulted in all of these issues. Here's another great example I like to think about. So every car that you guys have been in, every car has a cup holder, right? But does it have a place for a woman to put a purse? Right? So a woman gets in the car, the very first thing she does is put her purse down. There's nowhere to put your purse. Here's the other thing. There's no place for a woman to put her shoes. Every woman I know keeps multiple pairs of shoes in her car. This is something that men probably don't pay attention to, right? So things like minivans that have been around for, at this point, 20 years, have been through every kind of design, innovation, automated roof, automated sliding doors, automated trunk, but the very basics of what you do when you get in that vehicle and how you use it has not changed or evolved. So going into technology specifically, some of the examples I like to think about, there are several different health trackers that are quite popular. I think there's about 150 million health trackers that have been sold. So Apple has a health tracker, Nike, you have Fitbit. But not one of these, when they launched, had a period tracker, which is shocking, right? So women actually use health trackers at a greater rate of use than men. So over 50% of the audience for this product is actually female. And as anyone who uses technology, runs a technology company or any type of a platform knows, the most important thing on any of these is the engagement with your customer. Right? It's how often is your customer using your product, using your platform, using your app. So if you have a target audience that has a captive reason to engage with your product, and not one of the people that's involved in the user design came up with this, shouldn't they all be fired? Sorry, but I don't know. I mean, it's just, to me, it's this is pure economics, right? Another great example I like to just more of almost I find it hilarious, but a major global technology company naming their flagship product iPad. Just the marketing on that. Considering half your audience is women. I mean, And then just going back to AI, right? So we have several kind of personal assistants that have been designed in AI, but they all have a female interface, right? So whether it's Alexa or Siri or Amy. So again, going back to like, what are the deeper questions we're asking in terms of who is considered acceptable to a certain audience for, a personal assistant. I feel like if you ask most women, they would rather have like Idris Elba, maybe as the voice of their daily personal assistant. So it's,
So allow me actually to contradict you here for a second and put away my iPad. But actually, the studies show that women prefer female voices on their personal AI-driven assistants as much as the men do. There are actually 4 languages in the world that have the male Siri as a default out of all the others. One of them is Dutch, and you'll be very pleased to hear that. But so there's all the studies. They say that there's just more warmth, more emotion, more EQ rather than IQ coming with the female voice. How many of you here have iPhones or Google phones? How many of you actually have a male voice? Does anyone have a male voice? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Five people in a room of what? 400, I guess?
I think that's interesting, but at the same time, it goes back to the question of who's designing it, right? Because I think if you had women designing it, would they choose different male voices than the ones that are there?
Oh, so it's about the quality of the male voice.
I think you have to go deeper.
Rather than about the fact it's a male.
Yeah, I think you have to go deeper than just, the data as it is. So what I wanted to just kind of cover a little bit more closely is, so one of the things when we kind of talk about technology and economics, I actually like to say that we live in a female-driven economy, which you're forgiven for not realizing, right? So women control 85% of consumer spending globally. So this isn't just, in certain countries, this is globally. So that means that for most products, services, companies, technology, women are the target audience. Meaning that women purchase products and services for themselves, for their husband or partner, for their children, for their pets if they have pets, and then for their aging parents. So women hold more influence than any other customer. So it's almost shocking to realize when you look at companies that that's not reflected in the senior leadership. It's not reflected on the design teams. And it's not reflected in the people who are creating either the user interfaces and design or even designing the marketing campaigns that interact and engage with customers. So if you go deeper, you can actually, there's fantastic data. Women are actually kind of the largest productive force on the planet. So women actually outpace almost every country from a GDP perspective in terms of their productive capacity. So that's something you could go a lot more, much more deeply into. But then when you look at businesses and in terms of what gets funded, I think, and what gets funded and what leadership looks like, out of 1,500 S&P CEOs, I think there are fewer female CEOs than there are male CEOs named John. And then, yeah.
Including middle name?
And then you also have the numbers of women receiving venture capital funding actually decreasing. So I think you had about 15% in 2015, and those numbers have actually dropped to about 2%. So the more we've been talking about these issues, the less funding has actually been flowing to women.
Can I pause you right there for just a second? Because we actually have a person who has a personal experience with trying to get funding in the male-dominated VC world. And I would like to bring Anne right now into this conversation.
So hi, I'm Anna. I'm a co-founder and VP of engineering of Linus. So we are based in Berkeley, California, so work really closely to Silicon Valley. So I'll tell you a little bit about Linus because this kind of goes into why I'm on this panel today and talking a little bit about it. So Lioness is a women's sexual health company. We're building the first smart biofeedback vibrator that helps women learn more about their own bodies. So not every day do you hear people say, I make vibrators for a living, but that's me. So, so the reason why Lioness exists is because there's a huge lack of knowledge in women's sexual health. We talk a lot about on this conference about what is good data and how do we keep data good, but the problem with women's health is that there's really no data out there. So sexual health, research, the last research that was significant was done in the 80s by Masters and Johnson. Sex research is being defunded every year by universities, and they're being shut down. So that's sexual health, and then when we talk about women's health as a general, it's even bigger problem. So my favorite story to tell is the study of mice. So over 80% of studies done for medicines is done on male mice only, and the reason for that is because female mice have hormones, and so they're worried about the effect it has on the study. But then the problem is it affects women when they take the medicine differently. So a really good example is Ambien, which is the sleeping pill. So only recently they found out that when you take Ambien, women actually metabolize at a lot faster rate than men. So one pill is actually overdosing. So a lot of women have reported sleepwalking when they take Ambien. And so that's an incredible thought, that this is something that's so well on the market and sold everywhere, and we're not even realizing the effects it could have on women. So the idea is that what we want to do with our company is that we want to be able to launch it's almost a global research. Most sex research is in the sample size of 40, and this way we're doing thousands of research of women all over the world of different ages that can be affected by vaginosis, FSD, which is female sexual disorder, post-pregnancy, menopause, pelvic floor issues. So the idea is that we absolutely need more women in tech on all levels, whether it's fundraising, it's in the VC level, it's in the startup world. Fundraising has been a really fascinating topic. Just imagine going into a room. We're 5 full-time, 3 co-founders, 2 of us are women and 1 guy, and we go into a VC meeting. Generally tends to be mostly dudes. And then we talk about vibrators, and we bring out a vibrator. Most people will kind of step back and be like, oh, I don't think women really need this, or I don't think this is important. So it's a really difficult space, and it shows in women's health advancements. It shows in women's products. A really fun side tidbit just about vibrators in general. Most companies are run by men, and so I actually ran into a CEO of a vibrator company, and I asked him, and I was like, how do you know you're making a good product? How do you know this is something that women will want? And he told me the industry standard is to put the vibration on your nose, and that's what the simulation of what a woman's gonna feel. And that's horrifying that that's a standard, and that we're buying products made by people that want to put this vibration on your nose to test it. So it's an exhausting space to be in. So we absolutely need more women in this space, and in just every space in general, to really get that broad perspective, and that goes for underrepresented minorities as well. And just, don't think that it's a hopeless task to be able to do it. It's absolutely something incredible that's happening right now.
Thanks very much. Before we proceed to the final panelist, I would actually think that I will voice everyone's wish in this room and ask organizers to restart the clock for another 45 minutes of this fascinating discussion, because I think we're just starting to it's just the beginning. But one thing that scares me the most is the biases that we're building in rapidly developing AI systems. The advances in AI have been so fast. I mean, from the AlphaGo and everything, all the experts have not expected this type of no matter what Elon Musk says, that we should be actually much farther along the road. I think that majority of the experts actually themselves are surprised by the advances in AI that they've made in a few years. Now we have actually a person who's spoken to it from a perspective that you would be surprised. It's not only about the tech, but also very much driven by different parts of the house. Laura, please.
Thank you. My name is Laura Meyer, and I partner with clients. I work on their projects specifically in AI. And what I mean by artificial intelligence in this scope is that I work on natural language processing projects specifically in conversational automation, otherwise known as chatbots. The clients I've worked with have all been in the Bay Area in San Francisco. Apple, Sephora, Hyatt, big time clients are using artificial intelligence, specifically in customer service. And so today I want to start off with the fact that I am very appalled. Biz Stone, the co-founder of Twitter, tweeted, I believe it'd be yesterday in US time, "Y'all pile on us. You really think this issue doesn't weigh on us? And you're dismissive of the trust and safety team. We're all people." I need to call out the irony that he is talking to the Twitter community about phishing. Phishing is trolling, and he has to talk about and tone down the trolling because he is, number one, refusing to kick off Trump from the platform. That is a request coming from people based on the fact that he's inciting policy, he's citing war by the tweets that he's had. The second part of the request is that they actually come up with a solution for trolling and the harassment of individuals on the platform. So he's concerned about phishing himself. Imagine the ramifications and the detrimental experiences individuals have had. So there's three things I want to cover about artificial intelligence today. And the first one is the fact that these platforms are contributing to a space of not only harassment, but a violent atmosphere, an atmosphere of distrust, fear, and hatred that's specifically targeting minorities and women. Number two, I want to target the discussion behind bias within artificial intelligence. It's mirroring what we create and what we already think, and we've already talked about this on the panel, but it's just a copy of what we already believe. And the third thing is I do want to attack the discussion around diversity in tech. Technology is very complex to develop, and I come from a non-technical background. I have worked in I have a degree in a master's degree in finance and a undergraduate degree in public relations and marketing, and yet I'm working on an artificial intelligence project. So we need to expand the scope of how we define minorities in technology. So number one, in terms of harassment on these platforms, 20% of the political tweets that happened during the Trump and Clinton debate were manufactured by bots. And why that is a problem is that it only takes a few hundred bots to be retweeting, favoriting, and following users for something to become a trending issue. And as you've all seen, Congress has brought in Facebook, Google, and Twitter to testify about the influence of especially the Russian influence on purchasing advertising and the effect of bots on their platforms. This harassment is silencing people, and it also is impacting the fake news that's going around. It's not a lot of money they're making on this, $200,000 on Twitter for advertising, $100,000 on Facebook. But Facebook alone removes 1 million accounts, fake accounts per day. This is a lot to, I do admit it's a lot to track and to actually manage, but at the same time, they have 2 billion users, so it's a small percent for them to be examining. And the worst part about these platforms are that they are measured by monthly active users. They're actually incentivized not to remove accounts because this is showing their growth. And Twitter specifically, they're not gaining, I was having a discussion earlier this morning about that they're not gaining a younger audience. So that the more that they delete fake accounts, it's actually hurting their growth metrics that are used in the marketplace.
Hold on, Laura, just
Yes.
1 second. Sorry to interrupt. I'm just scanning the room to see if Alex Stamos is here, whether he has arrived, if he wants to add anything. Because Alex Stamos is the Chief Security Officer of Facebook, and I saw his name in the program, so I was wondering whether he's in the room. But actually, he's very I mean, one example, very, very cautious of all the issues that the platforms have to face, and is very value-based and tries to change things. You know, it's very easy to point a finger and say, you know, platforms clean up your act. Obviously, they should, and there should be conscious efforts, but is it that easy?
So I don't have the technical answer for that, and I will be in full admittance of that. But I think here's the problem, is that these technical executives, technology company executives, are actually first denying the fact that this is actually happening. That was how it all started. They're denying. Now they're finally admitting that evidence is coming out. And then third, once they're admitting and calling, then they're apologizing. I'm sure many of you saw that Mark Zuckerberg in his Yom Kippur Facebook message asking for forgiveness for the ramifications of their platform have actually caused in the election and the vice of nature. And just this morning, I was reading about how with the latest tragedy in Las Vegas, fake news was already being spread, that they are in their results in the news coverage. They had 4chan on Google, and then they had a Russian site being quoted on Facebook. This is a huge problem, and so maybe they can control the results, the general results, and there's an argument about whether they should be having a arbiter truth role in this platform. But I do think the trending results, that's an area that they can easily put a tag on eliminating false network, not network news or media sites that are valid. And additionally, I do think that human intervention is very important. The fact that they can say an apology and say, oh, it was only up for a few minutes. 30 minutes matters. It was not just a few minutes, it was 30 minutes, and they're not really admitting the actual problem. And I guarantee you, any engineer in that team, 30 minutes to complete something, 30 minutes to fix something, would never be excusable if it was something that had to do with their revenue. That amount of time is a lot of time in the engineering world. So the next thing I want to focus on is bias in artificial intelligence. This is an issue, and it's been covered a lot, and I just want to quickly get a few definitions out there. Action bias is one where, based on interaction and machine learning, machines actually get understanding and label future things based on that. So one of those things could be the fact that if you were asked to identify a shoe and only identified a man's shoe, then how would the machine know that high heels are a form of shoe? So that's a really obvious one. The next one is latent bias, and that's a correlation between images and tagging. Is a really good example of that. And that's, say, if we tag a man dressed up in let's say, a lab coat as a researcher or a doctor, and we never have that correlation with a female image, then the machine, once again, won't correlate women as potential doctors, researchers, and things like that. And the third is selection bias. If all the data, or 80% of the data, is whites, then they're not going to be able to recognize African Americans, people of color, and there's huge issues of that. And so the one example I do want to highlight is that these are having long-term ramifications, and I think it's a huge problem to people's careers, to their families, to their jobs, all these different things. And specifically, ProPublica in 2016 did a study on they were looking at the compass technology that's used in the courtroom, and it provides, many of you have probably seen this, that it provides a prediction level of whether people will commit a crime, and it actually influences the sentencing. Well, 77% of African Americans were predicted to commit a violent crime in the future. And so it's definitely impacting the sentencing in people's lives.
Yeah, Minority Report is my favorite movie by far. But based on your two experiences, I'm just wondering, this is fascinating for people that didn't know, the explanation of different biases within the AI systems. Is there a bias within the bias? Is the tech world biased towards a certain type of bias, and is it a little bit easier on the different ones? Like, what's the number one mistake? Is it mislabeling? Is it connections? Is it the data
It's the
set?
data that they're trained on. I think it starts with the data. If you don't clean the data, if you're not examining and having a diverse team actually look at it and create it, then bad quality creates bad information.
So going back to what Ritika was saying, if there's no data, how do you expect the good outcomes? Is that right?
Exactly. And then the second thing is human intervention once it's released. If you're not constantly examining the information that's out there and the algorithms out there, you have a problem. In the projects I worked on, we were constantly finding new bugs and errors, and that's just the nature of these systems, and it's no different in software.
Fascinating. Well, I think we have like 10, 15 minutes left, and the panelists have much more to say, but I wanted to give you an opportunity to come in and share your stories or ask them questions. I've been very selfish in being the only one asking them, so please, right here first. Please, if you have questions, you can already start lining up in front of a microphone so we've saved some time.
Hello.
We can hear you.
My name is Ramnath Raghunathan. I'm doing public policy from Mahatma Gandhi University.
Can you speak up a little bit?
Ramnath Raghunathan. My question is to the whole panel. While agreeing to what Ms. Muskan said about the intention to help remove the gender insensitiveness in both male and female, but I would like to hear more on the third gender, the category of queer, because we are dealing with gender and technology, and I haven't heard anything on the third gender. We have hearing of women, yeah, definitely they are, on the receiving end, but I would like to hear about third gender or transgender that has been categorized, if the panel would, because otherwise if we ignore that, that would really, amount to gender discrimination from the part of us as a whole.
Yeah, I think I can say something to that. As I see it, at the moment, that kind of discussion is a minefield. And I want to make some precautionary remarks. I think that the level of misogyny, hatred towards women, and the need to debase women is so endemic in society and in human beings that haven't kind of woken up to it, is that you can even see in the transgender community where, let's say, trans women are aggressive towards biological women. So with other words, trans women covet, this is my take on it, covet femininity, covet some feminine values or identity, but also express it by hating, raping, and murdering women. Then the other thing I want to say is that there is, from a society perspective, this absolute need for control, and seeing human beings as binary is a neat way of organizing your population. If we would learn from the old peoples, like some of the indigenous Native American Indians, who say, of course, there are 5 genders. They have always been 5 genders. I know from Indonesia, for instance, the Wajira community, if I pronounce it correctly, consider themselves as women born in male bodies. They believe that God has a purpose with them having a male body, but they have husbands and they don't dream of having a transgender operation. So there is much more knowledge and acceptance, and I can see a world where we would not have to regiment any born child, human child, into this binary order. It's not realistic, it's obsessive, and I think we should grow up. Having said that, is that as a biological female, and I'm a cisgender biological female, I cannot speak for a transgender man or a transgender woman, or for an intersexual person. And with all the pesticides that are being used all over the world, the number of intersex persons is also rising dramatically. Are
you recommending, if I'm just trying to understand.
Let me say one thing.
One question. Are you recommending to not focus on this issue at the moment just because of the sheer volume of things that we have to solve vis-a-vis just a pure gender balance? Or your recommendation is to address it at the same time?
Well, what I would urge for is for everybody to get the courage to see the things as they are. Like, the idea of a binary gender is an idée fixe. there always have been more genders. Why human souls decide to feel female or have a female identity and take on a male body, I don't know. That is between them and their God, right? As a society, I can see we can grow up. We can do better than this binary obsession. But for us as lay persons, I would say, learn to listen to people's genuine stories. But at the same time, there is a very distressing trend, especially in the US, where there is such an obsession with transgenderism that I think that a lot of children that would just grow out of any gender confusion already are transitioned and have become lifelong users of medicines and operations before they wake up to the fact that actually, you know, they could have grown out of it.
So you were absolutely right, Annika.
The last thought is, our societies are very, very sick. We are so sexist and we are so ingrained in the binary that for a boy to grow up with feminine capacities, it will be very easy for him to think, oh, I'm in the wrong body. No, he's in the wrong society. So instead of for this boy to kind of now fall in love with the idea of becoming a female and having all these transitions, maybe we should kind of see the things as they are and say, we have to transform our societies before more human children are going through this crazy period.
Well, you are absolutely right when you said it's a minefield. Beda is already pointing out that we need to clear the floor. So before we do that, I wanted to give perhaps a chance for a couple more people to ask their questions, but we have to be quick and we'll group them. Please, sir. Anyone else? Please, right after this gentleman, and then we'll have to wrap up the panel.
Not exactly the question, but certain comments. Sorry. I am former scientist G and senior deputy G from Indian Council of Medical Research.
Could you keep it
Indian
a little
Council
bit?
of Medical Research.
Mm-hmm.
I asked one question in many international conferences and national conferences also, why the life expectancy of female is more than male, ranging from 1 year to 10 years around the world. So that there is a myth that women are not so good at technology, women are so strong at home management technology, which men can never do. Secondly, when we talk about man, it is M-A-N, singular. When we talk about woman, W-O-M-E-N, one woman is equivalent to so many men. Literally, if you analyze man, M-A-N, woman is W-O-M-E-N, man, plural. So woman is always plural, equivalent to so many men. Secondly, since you belongs to the World Economic Forum, around the world so far, the home activities of the female at home are never being recognized in terms of economy. For example, at a 5-star hotel, one time's meal will cost around 3,000 to 4,000 rupees, or maybe around $20 or so. Have man ever paid any amount for morning, for lunch or dinner, or for tea to female? Just start paying that at home.
You just swapped out 80% of the world GDP right there by asking the question. You've done it. Global growth is dead. Anyone else? Please.
Hi everyone, this is Shubham. And when the feminism was started, and it transformed into black feminism, environmental feminism, and why not the cyber feminism? I mean, the problem of a woman in America is very much different from the problem of a woman in India, which is very much different from the problem of a woman in Africa. Then why there is not a singular lead that we should see that it is going in a one direction? So it is very much confusing. If somebody want to do in this area, he never finds a particular way that in which he have to forward. This is what my question is.
Did you understand the question? Could you summarize it briefly?
I mean that we are not getting a singular lead. We don't have a dream that where we are forwarding. I mean to say that.
Do you mean the lack of role models for
we don't have a
female
vision.
tech entrepreneurship and? So cyber Wonder Woman type of thing. Good. Anyone wants to pick this one? I feel Danielle has a lot to say on this one.
One of the things that I look at quite a bit is kind of entrepreneurship of women in the technology space. And one of the things that I feel like is lacking, I think we tend to think of our technology icons as being male as opposed to being female. But there is kind of this rising wave of what I call women-centered innovation, so women who are creating products and services for women based on women's experiences. So just kind of in counterpoint to a lot of the ideas and things I talked about before. But I think that in a way, just to respond to your question, I think it's really important because, we need to have kind of a new generation of Steve Jobses or Michael Loebs or whoever it is that are actually female. And I feel like that is what will be the beginning of starting to change the narrative, because the more successful women that you have, and one of the things that I'm seeing kind of as a trend is that women's companies are reaching, revenue and profitability and, reaching kind of billion-dollar valuations like much more quickly than you would expect. And so, I think that will result eventually in having more capital flowing to those companies and, more success and more support for and visibility. So I think that a lot of it will come out of kind of, I think almost organically, out of women building companies and building technology and starting to kind of create success in those spaces. And then I think that will start to change the dialogue in wider society.
Great. Well, I would like to go to Aneka to finish as well. But before, together with the answer to this question, I want her to also give her concluding remarks to wrap up. And everyone, in one sentence, just what do you want this audience to leave with? Please, Aneka.
Okay. In answer to this last speaker and Danielle's reply, I think there may already have been so many Wonder Women and they remained unrecognized. I don't know if you know, for instance, the name Ada Lovelace. And there were, in the beginning, when computer science and computers were not a highly valued field, there were a lot of women pioneers. Now, when I grew up as a cultural anthropologist. Margaret Mead used to say, in a society where weaving is valued and pottery is low value, women will do the pottery and men will do the weaving. In a society where pottery is high value and weaving is unvalued, men will do the pottery, women will do the weaving. There always has been in societies, and maybe you want to do your own research, a tendency for men to end up doing the work that is very highly valued by a society. We've also seen that with professions like, for instance, medicine and law. In communist societies where a lot of women would flock to those professions, we would immediately see the value, societal value, and financial value go down. So there is something about misogyny even on that level. Now, having said that, that doesn't mean that we can't change. And that is what I want to wrap up with and want you to take away, that tomorrow doesn't have to be as today. And I think we can all do our bit by acknowledging what is the sexism that I carry with me and that I don't want to face, that I don't want to acknowledge. Because I do believe that if we all would do that, we would be able to start changing our little environment and in bigger ripples. So if we start having the courage to see the things as they are, then we can take the next step, and that is finding a plan how to change them.
Fascinating. Start to change there. Ritika, in one sentence.
Yeah, sure. I just want to say that any conversation on gender and technology should ideally be happening along different vectors. So whether it is rural women versus urban women, whether it is about women as consumers, women as users, whether it's about women working, whether it's women who are not working and how they're interfacing with technologies. There's a multitude of differentiated data that needs to be brought to the table when we're talking about women and technology.
Fascinating. Danielle.
So I think the point that I would make would be that, you know, women are your primary customers for your companies, for your products, and you are leaving so much money on the table by not actually acknowledging that and building your teams accordingly. So I think that, you know, that is kind of the number one. Like, the future is female, but even right now, in terms of what teams look like and what companies look like, it's important to actually have gender reflected adequately in what you're building so that you can be maximizing what you're earning in terms of your products and your profitability.
Yeah, so my final remark, I want to go back to the Wonder Woman thing. So I think we're in the thick of the whole revolution of really listening to women and underrepresented minorities. So there's Wonder Woman on here in the audience, and so everyone else I would ask to be an active ally and continue supporting and listening and understanding different things that you've never thought about before, and continue supporting those people.
Great. Laura?
We need to redefine what we consider diversity in technology, and what I mean by that is that the projects I worked on, 41% of the projects were led by women. The reason being is they fall under innovation, marketing, and digital departments at enterprises. So what I mean by this is that we need to change the scope of how we're talking to young girls about opportunities. There's sales, there's marketing, there's design, there's finance, the legal sign-off of these projects matter, and to encourage more women, we need to change the marketing of that and actually share the full scope of what software and artificial intelligence takes to actually deliver a product.
Great. Well, thank you very much. As in the beginning of the panel, I did an example of 2 female victims of the first industrial revolution. It turns out that the first 2 victims of the third industrial revolution of automation and robotics were male. There was a gentleman called Robert Williams and Kenji Urada. And with this, not very, very gloomy, but what I'm trying to say is that we're all equal in the face of a tragedy. Perhaps we should all be equal in the face of opportunity, and it's everybody's responsibility to make sure that we start today, just like Ineka said. Thank you very much.